Masih bersama saya Safrina Nasution di Prime Word CNBC Indonesia dan kami masih bersama dengan Valerie Julian, United Nations Representative for Indonesia. Ms. Valerie, moving on to the next question about Indonesia's role on stabilizing and also the economic recovery efforts and easing global geopolitical tensions between countries. How does the United Nations see the role of Indonesia, especially as the host of G20 presidency last November?
Well, Indonesia has a very, I would say, important role to play and is well positioned to play that role. You mentioned the G20, it's already a very good starting point. Given that Indonesia was presiding over the G20 during this year, it has really given Indonesia the possibility to develop some specific elements, specific points in the agenda. And that was really a very good thing. First of all, I have to say the G20 started at a time when the war in Ukraine actually, the war in Ukraine started immediately after the G20 started. And therefore, it colored, certainly, many of the deliberation and discussion. And I want to say here that Indonesia has done an exceptional work with the G20. It has kept the whole G20 going despite the tension that existed between the members of the G20 that include, of course, Russia among them. But another thing that has been really crucial, and I think this is where also Indonesia has positioned itself very well, is that from the get-go, as a president of the G20, Indonesia has said that it would always speak on behalf of the least developed countries, the G77, and all the island states as an archipelagic nation itself. And I think this posture is really essential because the 20 countries of the G20 are the most powerful countries of the world. And indeed, what they decide impacts the rest of the world, but it could equally turn into a discussion among peers, and that's it. That Indonesia positioned itself from the beginning saying, from now on, as president of the G20, we will represent the G77. I think it was an important thing. Also, another aspect of the work that Indonesia did during the G20 was also to bring in some new agenda, like the blue agenda, the ocean agenda. They created Ocean 20. And it really helped to bring about the attention of the world, the necessity to really help the ocean. And this was very welcome because this year as well, we had the Ocean Conference organized by the United Nations in June in Portugal. And those issues really needed to be discussed at the level of these 20 most powerful countries. So this has been really a very important endeavor. Then there is, as I mentioned earlier on, the participation of President Widodo in the GCRG, the Global Crisis Response Group. And that as well is another, I would say, space where Indonesia can continue to influence and bring a solution to the issues of the world. And now we know that next year, in 2023, Indonesia is going to chair ASEAN group. And equally, with the different members of ASEAN and within this region, this can be a very influential position. And I would like to also highlight one additional point where I think Indonesia can also lead, give an example. It's on the issue of energy transition. As you know, this year, unfortunately, the COP27 that took place in Egypt ended up without the critical commitment and, I would say, decision that was expected from the world. Indonesia is a country that actually has a very big role to play in that as well. You know that the 20 countries of the G20 are also producing 80% of the greenhouse gases of the world. So whatever each of these countries it will make a difference in the level of protection of the planet. In the case of Indonesia, 80% of the electricity in Indonesia is produced by coal. So Indonesia has taken a commitment to phase down coal. And if Indonesia really does this as it has committed to do it, it can lead the effort globally and set an example. And it applies as well for the blue agenda. You know that we have actually in the margin of the G20, a national blue agenda actions partnership has been signed and launched together with the coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs, also the Ministry of Fisheries and BAPENAS. Together, a partnership was signed together with the UN and the development partners to make sure that all efforts combined, we do what it takes to save the ocean, to preserve the ocean. And that as well, Indonesia is the largest archipelagic nation in the world. And it can make a difference. If Indonesia really takes the good measures, it can lead by example.
But do you think Indonesia and its role, especially last November as the G20 presidency, we know that it has produced a leaders' declaration, as you mentioned before. Has this commitment been enough a solution to the main problems facing the world today?
Oh, it's never enough. It's not enough mostly because we are far today from achieving even the very basic agreement of the COP21 in Paris when it comes to climate, to make sure that we don't go beyond 1.5 degrees of increase of the overall global temperature. So it is not enough because we need a clear commitment. And as I was mentioning, the nations of the world, that includes the 20 nations of the G20, have not agreed on a stronger commitment during the COP27. So no, unfortunately, this is not enough. However, even if it is not enough, the next step is the implementation of what has already been agreed. Because you see, the way the world goes now, if we don't change, the Secretary General has been very clear. He said we are heading towards the wall, knowing that we are heading towards the wall with our foot still on the accelerator. This is a suicide, a collective suicide of humanity if we don't change the way we develop our countries nowadays. So yes, it is imperative that Indonesia, as well as the 19 other members of the G20, as a priority, these 20 countries, really implement what they have said. Absolutely, because the Leaders' Declaration somewhat makes a number of reference to previous commitments, to the different commitment, for instance, of the Paris Agreement and others. So if the Leaders' Declaration is to be implemented as it is said, yes, it will be already a big step. But we have had previous commitment in the past, and so far they haven't been. As I say, if I go back to the COP21 in Paris, which was really a milestone in the issue of climate, unfortunately, we haven't yet, let's say, implemented all what was said. The same with the SDGs, as we discussed earlier. The SDGs, when they were adopted in 2015, there was a plan so that in 15 years we would make sure that we can achieve them. And already before COVID, in 2020, 5 years only down the line, after the adoption of the SDGs, we were already lagging behind. So really, the world and all the nations of the world have to make a collective effort and think about the collective good it would bring, because we cannot, any country in the world today, cannot look only at itself, ignoring what's happening, because we are on a planet altogether.
So the Leaders' Declaration is a good start, but collective efforts...
It's a good addition. It's a good addition, not a good start. It's a good addition, but they have to implement it.
From the UN perspective, how deep is it the global economic clouds will be in 2023?
I would say in general it's very difficult to give exact figures, mostly because we could have done a projection, let's say at the end of 2021, looking at how COVID was evolving and then the war in Ukraine started. Now we have the war in Ukraine, but we don't know what will happen in 2023. I really hope that there won't be a major disaster.